Okay, here's the second video. Let's go back to this first formula that I introduced, where you're just doing a simple compound interest. Compound interest formula, here it is. Okay. Again, A is just for the account balance, the new account balance. You don't have to worry about the letter A. So really the only values you are going to need, and let me focus in here because it's just kind of like tiny here. You're going to need to figure out what the value of P is, the principal, right? And again, come back and read what P stands for. P stands for the initial amount, the money that's being invested, and that's called the principal amount, right? The beginning amount. That's your P, that's the letter P. Your interest rate is the R, remember, but that's going to be given in a percent. So you got to change it to decimal form like I talked about it in the first video. So I got the letter P, I got the letter R, I got the letter N, but notice I got to use that N 2 times, and this is the one that I'm going to focus on and speak about more right here in this video, what the N stands for. So I'll come back to that. And T stands for time, but time has to be in what? After how many years? So if it's 1 year, well, T is 1. If it's 5 years, then T is 5. If your time is like half of a year, like 6 months, then your time can't be 1. It has to be like 0.5, right? If it's half a year, it's only like half of a year, so it's 0.5. Okay, so let me talk about and just discuss the R part, because I'm sorry, not the R, the N. Okay, now what does it say here? It says N stands for the number of times. N is the number of times it is compounded N times a year. How many times? How many number of times am I going to compound this? Right? How many times is it going to be compounded? So sometimes they'll only compound the account once a year. So if it's only once a year, well, then your N is equal to 1, right? So let me take a piece of paper here, right? So for the value of N, which means what? Oh, I got to focus this. So N stands for what? And well, the book said what? Compounded M times of year. The book said compounded N times a year. How many times in a year is it going to be compounded? All right, so I'm going to make a little chart, and just to see if you get the right answer for the value of N. Let's say let's say the problem says that it's compounded. Yeah, that says compounded. Sorry for the sloppiness. If it says it's compounded annually, did I spell that right? Does it have 1 N's or 2 N's? Annually. No, I think I did. Annually means what? Every year. Annually, the word annually means every year. So how many times a year does that mean if it says it's compounded annually? Well, then your N is equal to 1. It's only compounded every year, once a year. Yeah. What would it mean if it's twice a year? What would be the way for them to say that it's twice a year? Well, you're going to hear this phrase, semi-annually. And you'll see that in an example. Actually, that's actually one word put together. Semi-annually, that means that it's actually compounded twice a year. Right? This one's once a year. Let me go back to this one. When it's annually, it's once a year. So how many times is it compounded in a year? Once. When it's semi-annually, that's what? Twice a year. So guess what's the value of n? How many times did I compound it in a year? Twice. N is equal to 2. Okay? And unless they directly tell you 3 times a year, 5 times a year, then that'll be the value of n. But here's another phrase that you'll hear. How about quarterly? How about if it says compounded quarterly? Well, quarterly is a quarter, right? How many quarters are in a dollar? A quarter is a fourth, right? A quarterly is a fourth. That means how many times is that? A quarter or quarterly? That means it's 4 times a year. Right? This is 4 times a year, so that's why. Well, for the value of n, you're going to use 4. Okay? And then what if it says it's compounded monthly? How many times will it be compounded if it's monthly? Well, gee, how many months are in a year? If you hear it say compounded monthly, what would be your value of n? How many times is it being compounded? Well, if it's compounded every month, how many times is that going to be in a year? Well, how many months are in a year? 12. Right? Because there's 12 months in a year. That's 12 times a year. Once every month in a whole year will be 12 times. Okay, so let me go back to the book. And the book even gets a little bit even more. But again, when you have to pay attention to this, how many times it's being compounded. And you're going to hear these key words. Either it's going to say annually, that means your value of n is 1. Semi-annually, that means your value of n is 2. All the other stuff is going to be straightforward. Your principal is going to stay the same. Your interest rate is going to stay the same. All that will pretty much be the same. The one that's going to vary is going to be this value of n. So let me go back to the book. And they actually do this, but I don't know why they show it after the example. Right? Because the example's back over here on this page. The example's back over here, and I'll come back to it right now. But if you look after the example, then they kind of explain n over here. I don't know why they do that. But you guys can see for yourself. Actually, I do know why. Because they're kind of seeing what your rate is going to be depending on which plan or which way you want to go with this. So here it is. Here's your value of n. If you're compounded it annually, well, how many times a year is that? 1. So remember, here's the formula. And well, for n, you'll put 1 and 1 for n, for the value of n. Notice that again, all of the other parts stayed the same. The principal was 300, and you'll see that in the problem right now. The interest rate was 6%, but remember you move it twice over, so it's 0.06. The time is 20 years, and you'll see that's why it's 20. And the n is the one that's kind of like the part that's changing it, or why the formula is different and why you're getting these different answers. If your n is 1 and you calculate this, you get this amount. If you're only compounded it once a year. If you're compounding this semi-annually, well, your n is 2. Well, you put a 2 here and you put a 2 and you get to the calculations, you get this different number. Quarterly is 4 times a year. Monthly is 12 times a year. Daily, if you're compounding this daily, how many times a year is that? Well, how many days are in a year? 365. And then hourly, oh my God, how do they get hourly? Well, there's 24 hours in a day. There's 24 hours in a day. 24 times, how many days are there? 365? 24 times 365. I bet you that's what it is right there. So that's why you're getting these different answers, because there's a different value of n. So you got to read the problem. Okay, let me go to the problem now, so you can see what's happening here, how they did this example. Okay, so what they did here is they try to show you an example, but they did one example, but with 4 scenarios. One example with 4 scenarios. Here's the examples. Here's the part that's going to stay the same. Here's the part that's going to stay the same. I hope you guys can read this. You guys have it in your book. But what's different about it is if the interest is compounded and then part A, they're doing the work or they're showing you the problem if it's compounded semi-annually. Well, if that's the case, your value of n is 2. That's for part A. If they're doing if all this stays the same, but they're compounding it now in part B monthly, see, then your value of n is what? Not going to be 2. Your monthly, how many times a year is monthly? 12. See, now your value of n is 12. And you'll see that here on the calculations. So that's part A. They did it with where n is equal to 2. Okay, they did the calculation. That was for part A. For part B, if they compounded it monthly, well, then the value of n is 12. And for part C, they did the same problem, but the different scenario was the value of n. They compounded daily. How many days are in a year? Well, 365. Okay, so that's what's happening in this. That's why you see kind of like one problem. Why is there one problem but 3 parts to it? Well, they're showing you how the value of n works. Okay, so let's read into this real quick. Christy invests $300. Let me move up to the little formula. That's your value of P. That's your principal. P is 300, or actually you can see it right here. P, 300. Let me zoom in here. Let me focus it. All right, this is the formula here, right? This is the formula, same one that's up here. Same one that's right here for compound interest. So here it says, Christy invests $300. That's P. 1 stays there. Can you guys see that? The interest rate is what, 6%, so that stays at, for the R, that's 0.06. Remember, change it to a decimal. And again, making no withdrawals or no deposits, no withdrawals. What will Christie's account balance be after 20 years? That's time, that's the T. N times T is up here in the exponent part 20 times what? And then N is 2. So that's why it's 2 times 20, because it's N times T. N is 2, the T is 20. Okay? So everything else stays the same. This 2 is here, and the N is here, and the N is here. So it's 2 and 2 because N is 2. But if you look at this one, you're compounding it 12 monthly, so that your value of N is 12. See, that's why now it's 12 here and 12 here. All right, so there it is. That's it. It's just, again, it's a formula, bottom line. It's a formula. It's going to be a word problem. All the information's there. Substitute it correctly. Study these examples. It's pretty straightforward. All right, good luck. See me in office hours, or we'll go over this in class in the Padlet. Okay, good luck.